The lands that later became the Kingdom of Rohan were originally part of the Gondorian province of Calenardhon, guarded by the stronghold of Isengard and the fortress of the Hornburg. But the civil war known as the Kinstrife and the Great Plague had weakened the realm of Gondor, and the enemies of the Dunedain, or the power that moved them, did not stay idle for long. Soon, nomadic eastern invaders that were wholly under the shadow of Dol Guldur renewed hostilities against Gondor. This culminated in the year 2510 of the Third Age, when Calenardhon was overrun by Wildmen, Easterlings under Sauron's control, invading from Mirkwood's eastern eaves. In this assault they were joined by orcs pouring out of the misty mountains. When news of this reached him, Cirion, the steward of Gondor, sent errant riders far and wide in Rovanion to seek aid, in spite of the scant chance of receiving an answer. Meanwhile, Gondor mustered all its strength to try to repel the invaders on its own and march northwards, but its fatigued army was cut off by its enemies and driven towards the river Anduin, where the Dunedain were cornered. In that desperate hour, when all hope had failed, the horns of horsemen from the north were heard. Eorl and his people, the Eortheod that lived near the Anduin Vales, had answered Gondor's call for aid. Their intervention saved the day. The horsemen's onslaught was too great for their enemies to withstand, and so the Battle of the Field of Celebrant ended in victory for Gondor and its allies. Those mountain orcs and Easterlings who were not cut down on that marshy ground turned to flee eastwards, but the Eortheod did not give up the pursuit, hounding Sauron's servants until they were all driven out of Calenardhon. Understanding that the small garrisons at Isengard and the Hornburg were not enough to protect Calenardhon, Cirion decided to repay Eorl's heroic deed. Cirion granted to Eorl that land to dwell in, and he swore to Cirion the oath of Eorl, of friendship at need or at call to the lords of Gondor. As the Eortheod settled there, their new lands became the Kingdom of Rohan, home of the Horse Lords, and they renamed themselves Eorlingas after their first king, Eorl the Young, though they were better known as the Rohirrim, famed for their rearing of and skill in riding horses. The steed of Eorl was Felarof, the first of the Mearas. According to tradition, it was believed that this breed was sired by horses brought over the sea from the west by the Vala or Rome, known to the Eortheod as Bema. Now the taming of Felarof had been no easy feat. When it was but a white foal, Leod, Eorl's father, had tried to mount it, but Felarof would not submit and threw him, and Leod hit his head on a rock and died. Eorl vowed to avenge his father and sought out Felarof. When he finally found him, he called out to the wild horse thus:
"Come hither, man's bane, and get a new name. Felarof, I name you. You loved your freedom, and I do not blame you for that. But now you owe me a great weregild, and you shall surrender your freedom to me until your life's end."
And Felarof submitted and allowed Eorl to mount him, and Eorl rode him without bit and bridle. Until the time of Shadowfax, none of the Mearas would let themselves be ridden by anyone save the King of Rohan himself. As I mentioned in another video, when Eorl and his people were granted their new lands, they began to push out the Hill Tribesmen that lived in the vales of the White Mountains. Gondor also turned the Hornburg over to Rohan, but chose to keep Isengard. The Tower of Orthanc was locked, and its keys were sent out to the ruling stewards in Minas Tirith. The original capital of Rohan was razed by Eorl and named Alberg, but Eorl also began the building of Edoras, which would not be completed until after his reign. Seeking retribution for their previous defeat, the savage tribes from the east attacked the kingdom. Thus it was that Eorl mounted Felarof once more and rode out to meet the Easterlings, but both the king and his noble steed fell in battle in the wold of Rohan. A barrow would be raised for Eorl, and Felarof would be buried with him. Eorl was succeeded by his son, Brego, who finally liberated the wold from the Easterlings. It was Brego who completed construction of the city of Edoras and the Golden Hall of Meduseld, where he would move the capital, while the town of Aldburg became the seat of power for Rohan's Eastfold. To celebrate this, the king threw a great feast. At the feast, his son, Valdor, vowed that he would tread the paths of the dead, and did not return. Brego died of grief the next year. The third king of Rohan was Aldor the Old, the second son of Brego, who ruled the kingdom for 75 years. In his time, those Wildmen that still lingered east of the river Isen were driven like the rest of their kin into the hills of Dunland. The Dunlendings' hearts burned with hatred for the Rohirrim and their Gondorian allies ever since. Almost nothing is said of the next three kings of Rohan, those being Freya, Freawine, and Goldwine, save that the realm prospered during their reign. Even so, peace would not last. Gondor had neglected Isengard, and South Dunland began to encroach on Rohan's northern borders. The vengeful Hill Tribesmen started raiding the villages and herds of the horse lords. These attacks would only grow more frequent by the time of the reign of Déor, the seventh king of Rohan and the grandfather of the legendary Helm Hammerhand, ultimately leading to the War of the Rohirrim. That's it for today, and as always, thank you for watching.